The tunnel was a marvel of engineering, a seemingly invincible artery beneath the earth, connecting to sprawling cities. No one ever imagined that this tunnel, touted as one of the safest in the region, would one day turn into a death trap. But that's exactly what happened. The collapse occurred without warning, taking hundreds of lives in a split second, leaving families shattered, a community in ruins, and an entire city grappling with the aftermath. You might think, a tunnel? That's a safe place. Right. It's built to withstand pressure, with walls of reinforced concrete, supported by the best materials available. But, as we soon learned, there are dangers lurking even in the most seemingly stable environments. The question isn't whether the tunnel was supposed to be safe, it's why it failed when it seemed so secure. What went wrong? Let me take you back to the morning of the collapse, the day it all began. It was supposed to be just another routine day in the life of the workers, who spent hours under the ground, keeping the tunnel in good working order. But as the day unfolded, things started to feel different. Small cracks appeared, unnoticed by most, but enough to put anyone with a trained eye on edge. A groan from deep within the earth echoed, but no one acted on it. After all, this tunnel had been standing for years. Who could have predicted that it would give way that very day? At first, there were rumors, small tremors, strange sounds from deep within the shaft. Yet, everyone brushed them off. The tunnel had stood the test of time. It was designed to endure much worse. Little did they know, the ground beneath their feet was about to turn into a deadly trap. The collapse itself was quick, brutal, and absolute. In a matter of seconds, the once proud tunnel became a tomb for those unlucky enough to be inside. But how could something so secure, so well designed, fail in such a catastrophic manner? Could this disaster have been avoided? The truth, as we're about to uncover, is far more complex than anyone could have imagined. The pieces of the puzzle are still being put together, but the scars left behind will last for generations. Now, before we go deeper into the investigation and uncover the chilling details of what led to this disaster, I need to hear from you. Have you ever had a moment where something you trusted just failed? Leave a comment below and share your thoughts, because the truth behind this collapse might surprise you. If you haven't already, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe if you want to stay updated on more stories like this. Stay with me through this investigation and let's uncover the truth together. Let's dive into the background of the tunnel's construction, how it was built, and what made everyone believe it was safe. To understand how this disaster could unfold, we first need to take a step back and look at the tunnel itself, the very heart of this tragedy. Constructed over the course of several years, it was heralded as one of the most advanced projects of its time. The tunnel was not just a functional piece of infrastructure. It was a symbol of progress, of a future where cities could be connected in ways previously unimaginable. It was meant to alleviate congestion, improve transportation, and become a vital lifeline for both commuters and goods. The idea for the tunnel began long before the construction crews ever broke ground. The region had been experiencing explosive growth, with more people flocking to the city each year. The government saw an opportunity to alleviate the strain on the existing transport network and create a safer, faster route for both residents and travelers. Thus, the plan for the tunnel was born, a vast underground structure that would stretch 4 miles, cutting through the rocky landscape and linking the two bustling cities. Engineers from around the world were brought in, and the latest technology was used to design the tunnel. It was built to withstand massive amounts of pressure with reinforced walls designed to hold against both natural forces and human-made disasters. Every measure was taken to ensure safety. Extensive testing, cutting-edge materials, and constant monitoring. This was not just a tunnel, it was an achievement, a testament to human ingenuity and ambition. But what made this tunnel even more significant was its location. Connecting two cities that were rapidly expanding, the tunnel was a vital artery, providing a faster route for people and goods to move between the areas. Its completion was supposed to change the way people lived, making transportation smoother and more efficient. The people who worked on it and the ones who traveled through it believed in its promise of safety. They had faith in the expertise behind its construction. However, as we now know, no matter how advanced the technology or well-designed the project, the unexpected can always happen. The purpose of the tunnel, its promise of progress, and the trust people placed in it were all brought into question that fateful day. The tunnel, once a symbol of hope, would soon become a grim reminder of how the cost of overlooking small signs of danger can result in disaster. But how exactly did this marvel of engineering fall victim to such a tragic fate? What went unnoticed during the years of planning and construction? The answers lie in the unnoticed cracks, both literal and figurative, that would eventually lead to the collapse. Stay with me as we delve deeper into the day of the collapse itself to uncover the overlooked signs that should have raised alarms. Before we continue, I want to hear your thoughts. Have you ever encountered something that you thought was perfectly safe, only to realize it wasn't? Drop a comment below, and don't forget to like the video if you're finding this as shocking as I am. Let's move on to the day of the collapse, where everything changed in a matter of seconds. To truly grasp the scale of this tragedy, we need to focus on the people who were directly impacted by the collapse of workers. These weren't just nameless individuals. They were fathers, mothers, sons, daughters, people with lives, families, and dreams. They were the ones who spent countless hours in the depths of the tunnel, working tirelessly to ensure that the project ran smoothly. Many of them had been part of the team since the very beginning, dedicating years of their lives to the construction. These workers were, for the most part, skilled laborers. Many had worked on similar projects in the past, but nothing quite like this. The tunnel, with its immense size and complexity, was a massive undertaking. The work was grueling. Long hours, deep underground, far from the safety and comforts of home. The conditions were harsh. Ventilation systems were less than ideal, making it hard to breathe for long stretches of time, and the noise of drilling, blasting, and machinery created a constant barrage on the senses. Yet, the workers carried on. This was a job many were proud of. It was an opportunity to contribute to something that would benefit future generations, and there was a sense of camaraderie among them. They worked side by side, supporting one another through the challenges, each day closer to completing the tunnel that would forever change the region. Despite the dangers, the workers didn't think twice about the risks involved. They were doing something that felt necessary, something that would bring prosperity to their community and future generations. The workers who spent their days in the tunnel came from various walks of life. Some were seasoned construction workers who had worked on bridges and buildings, while others were young men eager for a steady job in an economy that offered few opportunities. Many had families that relied on them, with young children or elderly parents to care for. For them, the tunnel was more than just a job. It was a chance to provide a better future. But what most of these workers didn't know was that the tunnel was not as stable as they had been led to believe. While the project was designed to handle massive loads, there were cracks, both figurative and literal, that, had been overlooked during construction. These cracks would not only compromise the structural integrity of the tunnel, but would also change the lives of these workers forever. What is often forgotten in discussions of such tragedies is the human cost. These workers weren't faceless numbers. They were people who lived, loved, and dreamed. They were part of a community, and many had just begun to make their way in the world. For some, the collapse meant the end of their future, their families' hopes shattered in an instant. For others, it was the beginning of an agonizing fight for survival. The workers were, in many ways, the backbone of the project. Without their dedication, their labor, and their sacrifice, the tunnel would never have been completed. And yet, they were the ones who paid the highest price when disaster struck. But what led to the collapse that claimed their lives? What were the overlooked signs? And why didn't anyone act on them? As we continue, we'll take a closer look at the day the tunnel gave way, the small details that no one saw coming, and the aftermath that followed. It started as just another day, routine and predictable. The workers arrived early, greeted by the usual hum of machinery and the steady rhythm of work. Nothing seemed amiss. The tunnel had been operational for years, and there had been no serious issues up to that point. Safety protocols were in place, regular checks were conducted, and everyone expected the same outcome: a productive, uneventful day. But beneath the surface, something was wrong. Tiny signs, nearly imperceptible to the untrained eye, were already starting to manifest. A slight shift in the air pressure, a low rumble deep within the earth, a creaking the tunnel walls that no one thought twice about. These were the first whispers of something catastrophic. Yet, no one paid attention. It was dismissed as the usual sounds of the underground, nothing to worry about, just part of the environment. The first significant sign came during a routine inspection. One of the workers, a seasoned engineer who had been part of the project since the beginning, noticed an odd feeling in the air. The tunnel seemed quieter than usual, as if the usual hum of the machinery had been swallowed by the dark walls. He felt a slight vibration beneath his feet, a tremor that seemed to shake the ground subtly. But again, it was dismissed. Perhaps it was just a shift in the foundation, a minor flaw in the tunnel's design, nothing that would cause immediate danger. But the vibrations grew stronger, and soon a few cracks appeared in some of the tunnel's walls. Small, hairline fractures, but nothing unusual for a structure this massive. These signs should have been alarming, should have sparked immediate concern. However, the workers were under pressure to finish the job. There was no time to halt construction over a few cracks. The tunnel had stood for years, and the risks seemed manageable. After all, the safety inspectors had been through, and everything had passed. What could go wrong? It wasn't until the earth beneath them began to tremble more violently that anyone started to take notice. By then, it was too late. The ground rumbled, and a deep, low moan echoed through the tunnel. Then came the sound of stone and concrete cracking like the bones of the earth itself breaking apart. Panic set in, but it was too late to escape. The collapse was inevitable. What happened next was chaos. The tunnel, once a symbol of human achievement, became a tomb. The walls crumbled, debris poured from above, and a dark cloud of dust filled the air. The workers, some trapped, some desperately scrambling to escape, had only moments to react. The tunnel, which had promised to be their protector, became their executioner. How did things get this far? How did these small signs of distress go unnoticed? The truth lies in the culture of complacency, the overconfidence in the tunnel's safety. People believed that because it had worked so far, it would continue to work, and in a sense, It did right until the moment it didn't. The human cost of ignoring these warning signs is devastating. This tragedy could have been prevented, but the signs were overlooked, ignored, or downplayed. But why? Was it overconfidence in the engineering, a desire to push forward despite the risks, or was it simply that people didn't want to believe that something so massive, so well built, could fail? The dust had barely settled when the true scope of the disaster became apparent. The once bustling tunnel was now an unrecognizable, twisted labyrinth of concrete and steel. A place that was supposed to carry people safely from one side to the other had turned into a mass grave. The first responders, already on standby for routine maintenance checks, found themselves thrown into a nightmare they could not have prepared for. Rescue efforts began immediately, but the scale of the collapse made any hope of a swift recovery impossible. The tunnel, massive and deep underground, had created a near impossible situation for anyone attempting to navigate its wreckage. Thick clouds of dust filled the air, making it nearly impossible to see more than a few feet in front of them. The air was suffocating, heavy with debris and the smell of earth and metal, the sharp scent of danger hanging in every breath. Rescue teams scrambled to find entry points, their hearts heavy with the knowledge that many of the workers were likely trapped inside, unable to escape. They were aware that time was critical. The longer they waited, the fewer the chances of survival for those buried beneath the rubble. But the danger was real, not just from the unstable structure of the tunnel itself, but from the risk of more sections collapsing without warning. The emergency teams worked with grim determination. They pulled out the few survivors who were lucky enough to be near an exit point, covered in dust but alive. The relief of finding one person, then another, was overshadowed by the grim realization that many were still unaccounted for. The clock was ticking. Every second felt like an hour as rescuers struggled to move through the wreckage, digging through broken concrete and twisted metal, unsure of where the tunnel had once been and where it ended now. But it wasn't just about the physical struggle of rescue. It was the mental and emotional toll that weighed on the workers, the survivors, and the emergency responders. The rescuers found themselves digging not just for bodies, but for the fragments of hope, for the faintest signs of life beneath the rubble. Every time a cry for help echoed from the depths, it was like a spark in the darkness just enough to fuel their efforts for another hour, another minute. But as the hours turned into days, the truth began to settle in. Not everyone would be found alive. The tunnel's collapse had been so catastrophic, the damage so extensive, that only a small number of workers had managed to survive. Many more would never be seen again. The real toll of the disaster was not just in the lives lost, but in the sheer scale of the lost. Families were torn apart, entire communities devastated. Yet, despite the growing despair, the rescue efforts never stopped. Teams from neighboring cities were called in, and heavy machinery arrived to assist in the most complex operations. What followed was a delicate operation to remove the wreckage, piece by piece, inch by inch. But the loss of life was immeasurable. As the days wore on, the site of the collapse turned into a place of mourning. It became clear that the disaster was not just an accident. It was the result of a catastrophic failure, one that could have been prevented had the warning signs been acted upon. But for the families who lost loved ones, it was too late for could have been. Now, as we move to the next part of the story, the investigation into the cause of the collapse, we'll uncover how the tragedy was not just the result of bad luck, but a series of overlooked mistakes that, when combined, created the perfect storm of failure. But first, Let me know, what do you think happens in moments like this? How would you cope with the aftermath of such a loss? Share your thoughts in the comments below as the dust settled and the immediate chaos of the rescue efforts faded into the background. The real work began. Authorities quickly turned their focus from saving lives to uncovering the root causes of the collapse. What had happened to cause the failure of a tunnel that had been deemed safe, engineered with the latest technology and constructed under strict safety regulations? The investigation was a massive operation that involved a team of engineers, safety experts, and government officials. They began by carefully analyzing the wreckage, piecing together the physical evidence from the disaster site. Their first challenge was to determine the exact cause of the collapse. Was it a structural failure? Did the tunnel walls crack due to external forces, such as seismic activity, or had there been a design flaw that went unnoticed during construction? Early reports suggested that the tunnel had been designed to withstand the pressures it faced. Experts pointed to the high-quality materials used in construction and the advanced engineering that went into every step of the process. So, what went wrong? The more the investigators dug, the clearer the picture became. It wasn't just one single failure, it was a series of smaller, overlooked issues that compounded over time. First, the soil beneath the tunnel was found to be less stable than originally thought. Though the engineers had relied on geological surveys that indicated the ground would be stable enough for construction, the reality was far different. Over time, the earth had shifted, weakening the foundation and causing small, unnoticed shifts in the tunnel structure. This destabilization, coupled with the high-pressure load from the weight of the tunnel, set the stage for a disaster. However, the most shocking revelation came when investigators discovered that the tunnel's structural integrity had been compromised years before the collapse, long before the workers even set foot inside. Maintenance records revealed that critical checks and repairs had been postponed several times due to budget cuts and delays in the workforce. The very systems designed to monitor the tunnel's health had not been properly maintained, and early signs of damage went unaddressed. What was even more troubling was the discovery that some of the workers had raised concerns about the tunnel's condition in the weeks leading up to the collapse. There were reports of cracks in certain sections, but these concerns were dismissed by management as routine wear and tear. The safety inspections, which were supposed to catch such issues, had become more of a formality, with reports that were filled out quickly and without proper attention to detail. But the investigation didn't stop there. The authorities also began to question the original construction process. Were shortcuts taken in order to save time and money? Was the project rushed in order to meet strict deadlines? Investigators found that, while the tunnel had been built using high-quality material, there had been moments when corners were cut to expedite the process. These decisions, made under pressure, had a long-term impact on the tunnel's structural health. As the investigation unfolded, the public was left to grapple with the stark reality. This tragedy could have been prevented. There were numerous warning signs along the way: small cracks, overlooked maintenance, delayed inspections, but they were ignored in the rush to complete the tunnel. The cost of this oversight was far more than just financial. It was human lives. When a disaster like this strikes, the statistics are shocking, but they don't tell the full story. Behind every number is a person, a worker with a life, a family, and dreams of a future. The collapse of the tunnel didn't just destroy infrastructure. It tore apart families and irrevocably changed a community that had always depended on the people who worked in that tunnel. One of the victims, Jose, had been with the tunnel project from the very beginning. He was in his mid-30s, a father of 2 young children, and he had been excited to be part of something so monumental. His wife, Maria, was pregnant with their third child when the collapse happened. Hosea had always believed that his work would provide a better life for his family, a safer, more prosperous future. The collapse, however, shattered those dreams. His family is left to carry on without him, raising children who will never know their father. Then there was Carla, a young woman in her early 20s who had just started working in the tunnel as a project assistant. She was ambitious, determined, and eager to prove herself. She had a bright future ahead of her, one that she hoped would lead to a career in civil engineering. Carla's mother, Maria Lena, recalls how excited Carla was to come home every day with stories of the progress they were making, the challenges they were overcoming. Now, Maria Elena holds on to those stories, the memories of a daughter whose life was tragically cut short. The community mourns her, not just for the loss of a young life, but for the promise she held. Carlos, a foreman, was known for his tough but fair leadership. He had been with the company for over 15 years, guiding workers through every project, big and small. He was respected by his peers and loved by his family. His wife, Sofia, says that Carlos never hesitated to put in the extra hours, even when the job was risky. But he did it for them, for their future. He wanted to retire in peace, to spend time with his children and grandchildren. The collapse stole that future from him and left his family to deal with the heartbreak. These are just a few of the many individuals whose stories we'll never fully know. The lives they had before the tunnel disaster are now marked by tragedy, and their families must try to piece together what remains. They were workers, yes, but they were also people with hopes, fears, and futures that will never come to pass. The loss to the community is immeasurable. The people who are part of this project weren't just numbers, were neighbors, friends, sons and daughters, husbands and wives, in a town that relied on the tunnel to connect its industries and people. Their absence is felt deeply. Families grieve not just for the loss of loved ones, but for the sense of safety that was shattered that day. It's a community forever changed, a place where the wounds of the collapse will never fully heal. As the community comes to terms with the loss, they begin to ask questions. How could this have happened? Who is responsible for the lack of attention to the warning signs? And more importantly, how do you move forward when the heart of your town, the very people you relied on, are gone? The pain is not just in the immediate aftermath, but in the lasting impact on the survivors and the community as a whole. The families who are left behind must pick up the pieces, and the scars of this disaster will be carried for generations. The physical destruction of the tunnel was devastating, but the psychological aftermath was just as catastrophic. For the survivors, the trauma of being trapped, watching their co-workers perish, and narrowly escaping death left scars that would never fully heal. And for those who had lost loved ones in the collapse, the pain was not only in the loss, but in the haunting memory of how it all happened. The survivors, many of whom were injured or deeply shaken, faced a long road to recovery. Some had physical wounds, broken limbs, internal injuries, and bruises that would eventually heal. But it was the emotional scars that were harder to address. The weight of witnessing their friends and colleagues trapped in the rubble, unable to do anything to save them, lingered long after the dust had settled. These were men and women who had once worked side by side, laughing and sharing stories, but now found themselves lost in the silence of their own minds. For many, the nightmares began almost immediately. Some would wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, hearing the sounds of crumbling concrete, the screams of their fellow workers, or the eerie silence that followed the collapse. They couldn't shake the image of the tunnel, the bodies they couldn't reach, or the moments before everything changed. The survivors struggled with guilt that they had made it out when so many others hadn't, and guilt that they hadn't noticed the signs, hadn't been able to prevent the disaster. The emergency responders who rushed in to save those trapped inside weren't immune to the psychological toll either. Many of them were seasoned professionals, used to dealing with accidents. But the sheer scale of this disaster was unlike anything they had ever faced. The first responders had to deal not only with the physical aftermath, bodies, the debris, the destruction, but also with the overwhelming sense of helplessness. Many of them had worked tirelessly, trying to save as many people as possible, but there was only so much they could do. For these responders, the emotional weight of the tragedy was almost unbearable. Witnessing the grief of the families who arrived at the scene, waiting for news of their loved ones, was a constant reminder of the deep, unhealable wounds left behind by the disaster. The strain of seeing a community broken, of knowing that some lives could have been saved with more time or better conditions, caused many responders to experience what is known as compassion fatigue or post-traumatic stress. Their sense of duty was strained to the breaking point, and in the weeks that followed, many found themselves struggling with depression, anxiety, and a sense of failure. For the families, the trauma was equally severe. The waiting was agonizing, and the uncertainty about whether their loved ones would be found alive added to the emotional torment. The families of the victims spent days in anguish, their hopes rising and falling with every bit of news from the site. And when the truth became clear, when the bodies were recovered and the scale of the tragedy was fully understood, the grief was overwhelming. The families of those lost in the tunnel collapse had to cope with not just the immediate shock of the loss, but also the long-term effects of a life that had been turned upside down. Children lost their fathers, spouses lost their partners, and communities lost their pillars. The ripple effect of the disaster was felt deeply, not just in the homes of the victims, but across the entire town. No one was untouched by the devastation. Every worker who died in the collapse was not just a statistic, they were a part of the fabric of the community. In the months and years following the disaster, survivors, responders, and families would all seek help in different ways. Some turned to therapy, others leaned on faith, and many found solace in the support of the community around them. But the road to recovery was long, and the emotional scars would last far beyond the time it took to rebuild the tunnel. The disaster left behind a legacy of trauma that affected not just those who were directly involved, but an entire generation that lived through the aftermath. In the wake of the tunnel collapse, authorities, engineers, and safety experts all sought answers. How could something that was built to withstand the forces of nature and the pressures of heavy traffic have failed so catastrophically? And, more importantly, how could this tragedy have been prevented? The initial investigation revealed that the disaster wasn't the result of a single catastrophic failure. It was a chain of events, a combination of factors that, when put together, led to the devastating collapse. The first of these factors was the failure to properly assess the underlying geology of the area. While the tunnel had been designed with care and precision, the ground it was built upon had not been adequately tested over time. The soil, once thought to be stable, had slowly shifted and settled over the years, creating structural instability. One of the most significant lessons learned was the importance of continuous monitoring. Engineers had relied on initial soil tests and conditions that were taken years before the tunnel's construction. But what they failed to take into account was the way the environment changed over time. A more proactive, ongoing examination of the ground stability could have raised red flags long before the tunnel's walls started to crack. Another factor that came to light was the role of routine maintenance. The tunnel had been subjected to inspections, but they were often rushed and not thorough enough. As the investigation uncovered, small cracks and signs of wear were noted in the maintenance logs, but were not acted upon in time. The focus on deadlines combined with insufficient attention to the structural health of the tunnel created a dangerous environment where warning signs were ignored. The tragic truth was that a failure to act on these signs led directly to the disaster. In response to these findings, the government and engineering companies implemented sweeping changes to safety protocols. One of the most significant changes was the introduction of more advanced real-time monitoring systems. Sensors were installed in tunnels across the country, continuously assessing the health of the structure and sending alerts when any potential issues arose. This innovation helped create a more proactive approach to tunnel maintenance, where issues could be addressed before they became critical. Furthermore, the criteria for conducting inspections were revised. No longer were inspections to be treated as a routine, obligatory task. They became a more thorough, in-depth process that involved a larger team of engineers who worked together to assess every aspect of a tunnel's structural integrity. Regular stress tests, material checks, and seismic stability evaluations were added to the protocol to ensure that no section of a tunnel was overlooked. The goal was clear: prevent another disaster, no matter the cost. The disaster also led to a rethinking of the tunnel's design. Engineers went back to the drawing board, revising the methods used to assess the terrain before construction. They began using more advanced imaging technology, such as ground-penetrating radar, to get a clearer picture of the underground environment. This allowed for more accurate predictions of the ground's movement and stability, enabling engineers to design tunnels that could better withstand unpredictable conditions. The human cost of this collapse was devastating, but the lessons learned from it have led to stronger safety practices and protocols. While no amount of safety measures can bring back those who were lost, the changes made in the aftermath of the disaster are helping to ensure that future projects will be built with greater care, precision, and foresight. However, one question remains: how much should we rely on technology and advanced monitoring systems to predict failures? Can we ever be truly certain that our safety measures will be enough? The tragedy of the tunnel collapse left an indelible mark on the community and the engineering world. But it also serves as a stark reminder of how we must never stop learning from our mistakes. Now, as we approach the final chapter of this story, let's take a look at how the community is rebuilding and what the long-term impact of this disaster has been. But before we move on, I want to know your thoughts. Do you think the right changes were made in safety protocols? What else should be done to prevent disasters like this in the future? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to stay updated. As we explore the ongoing recovery from this tragedy, let's now take a closer look at how the community is finding its way forward after this catastrophe. The collapse of the tunnel left behind more than just rubble and broken structures. It left a scar on the community, a wound that time will never fully heal. While the physical damage to the region can be repaired, the emotional and psychological scars will last for generations. For the survivors, the families of the victims, and the responders who witnessed the chaos, the disaster is something they will never forget. In the years following the collapse, the community struggled to recover. The families who lost loved ones found themselves navigating a world without the people who had been their anchors. Many of them never had the chance to say goodbye, their lives shattered in an instant. The grief was not just in losing family members, but in the realization that they had lost their sense of security. The tunnel had been a symbol of progress, of a bright future. Now, it represented a loss so profound that words could hardly capture its depth. For the survivors, the struggle was different. The physical wounds would heal, but the emotional ones ran much deeper. Some of them still have nightmares, still hear the sounds of the collapse echoing in their minds, and still feel the weight of guilt even though they did nothing wrong. The trauma they carry is a burden that will follow them for the rest of their lives. But in many ways, their survival is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. They have learned to live with their pain, to rebuild their lives from the fragments of a disaster that tore everything apart. The community as a whole faced a long road to recovery. The tunnel had been the lifeblood of the area, and its destruction created a ripple effect that impacted every aspect of life. The local economy suffered as businesses were forced to adjust to the new reality, and the sense of unity that once existed among the residents was shaken. It would take years before the region could begin to heal, and even then, the memory of the collapse would hang over everything. Yet, despite the devastation, there is a sense of hope. The disaster forced the community to come together in a way they never had before. The survivors supported one another, the families of the victims found strength in their shared grief, and the responders became heroes in the eyes of many. The resilience of the people who lived through the collapse is what will ultimately define the region. They have learned from the tragedy and vowed never to forget the lessons it taught them. As we look back on this tragic event, we must ask ourselves, what can we learn from it? How do we ensure that something like this never happens again? The answer lies in the actions we take today. By continuing to improve safety measures, by learning from our mistakes, and by honoring the memories of those who were lost, we can create a future where tragedies like this are less likely to occur. If you've made it this far, you've experienced the full journey of this disaster and its aftermath. Let me know what you think. In the comments, how has this story impacted you, and what lessons do you think we should take from it? If you haven't yet, please consider subscribing to the channel. Your support helps us bring more important stories to light. And if you found this video insightful, please give it a like. It really helps us continue to share these stories. There's another video right here that delves deeper into the consequences of industrial accidents. Click on it and join me for the next chapter.